How are you, Mr. Cooley?
Oh, I'm good. How about you?
Good.
Ready for the wind?
Been ready. It's October 1st. That's when it starts.
I kind of thought
Yeah.
doing that one. I thought that was the case. Another typical thing, right? Steve, how are you doing?
Good. How about you?
Hello, ladies. How are you? Hello.
Good.
How are you? Good. How about yourself? Just cannot complain at all. I'm still walking.
The wind actually felt really nice this morning. We're plugging in, I guess.
Yeah. You're
The wrong chair.
Yeah, you're this, right?
Yeah.
I would do my best. I am so tired. I decided to revamp my yard over the weekend. So I am just looking around, digging and planting, and I didn't realize how much it would make me feel wiped out on Monday.
Yards in your in.
How are you doing? I'm going to talk to the chief for a minute.
Hi, I'm doing good. How are you today? Good.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Hello. Hello.
Everybody's intently looking.
Good evening, fine, thank you.
6 o'clock. Right on time.
Okay. Call this meeting to order at 6:03. And we'll proceed to move right into our agenda.
Would you like me to do the roll call for you?
I'd like to do the roll call.
Mayor Carroll,
Here.
Councilmember Santos,
Here.
Treasurer Sharon Geiser,
Here.
Chair Steve Cooley,
Here.
Vice Chair Richard Beneke,
Present.
Member Stephen Martino,
Present.
Member Joanne Roberts, Member Anna Aldera,
Here.
and alternate member Andrew Forster.
Okay, I have no indication of anybody requesting to be excused, so we can move from there. Let's go right to our Pledge of Allegiance. If you would stand, please. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Are there any adjustments to the agenda that anyone's aware of? Move on. Any conflicts of interest? Doesn't appear to be anything that could be sitting there. So then we'll move to our public comment period. And again, we'd like to remind you that any one person may address the committee on any matter not on this agenda. If you wish to speak and have not done so, please fill out a public comment form, provide it at the back table, and give it to the secretary. There is a 3-minute limit on public comments. There will be no sharing or passing of time to another person. And finally, state law prohibits the committee from discussing or taking actions brought up by your comments.
I do have a request to speak. You want to go ahead and open the public comment?
Let's go ahead and open it for comments.
Libby Yurmovic.
Libby Yurmovic. You have your contract for your 2018 audit to the PUN group, knowing that they forged your last audit. And if you're turning over your financial statements to be audited, the general ledger must be complete. You have documents that should have came from the general ledger and not just plugged numbers. Public records request, general ledger from July 1st, 2017 to June 30th, 2018. Takes 5 minutes. Pass that to me electronically.
Any other speakers?
No other speakers.
Okay, let's move on to the next item on the agenda. And that will be the review and adoption of the meeting minutes from September 10th, 2018.
Move to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? And then they will be moved, seconded, and approved. So the first item on our agenda that's not one of the regular, somewhat routine ones, is the internal control checklist. And
Yes, I took the comments from our last meeting and I expanded the checklist and I brought it to the committee this evening just to make sure I have all of the elements and components in a format that makes the most sense that the committee can work from going forward as we make additional changes to our internal control structures and policies and procedures and such.
I like the changes, Milana.
Okay.
I like the inclusion of the percentage complete, the due date, and you reworded some of the actions and some of the pending actions. And I think they more closely reflect what the objectives are
Okay.
for both the proceeding forward and then finishing it up. And I like the coding.
Okay.
That was good. So we can track the severity on that. So
Okay.
I think all of the changes, from my perspective, looked like what we asked for. And I'll leave it at that, and maybe some of the other members have comment.
Anybody have comments?
When you have completed one of the items, is there a different word coding for it? Because you have material weakness, significant deficiency, and other matter. But once you complete it, what's going to be the code word for that?
I didn't change that code because that's the status that the auditors gave to the finding. So they would have labeled it one of those three, so I left it that way. Then when it's completed, then I just have on the far right, just, the date that we feel that we've completed that finding. And then the first full fiscal year that the changes would have been placed in effect, that would be the year that I would expect to not have that finding again on the next letter.
I think Anna brought up a good point, but I think it's good to have both the MSO coding of it, because that doesn't change even when it's completed. In other words, it was a material weakness.
Right.
And then when you verify that it's been completed, the material weakness remains.
Right.
So I
Unless
think
when
that's-
if, for example, the auditor comes in and tests what we've done and said, okay, you did good with this, it's not a material weakness anymore, but you still have something we need you to change, so they downgrade it to something else, then I would change the code.
Right.
But that really reflects what the auditors had already told us.
Any other questions?
I have a quick question. So this sampling, the spreadsheet on the next page behind your letter, this is just a sampling summary of, or is this the total inclusive?
This is the inclusive list from the internal control letter from the auditors.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. And when we're looking at some of these, just from my own understanding, when I'm looking at the priority, you have a numerical value plus a term like done, research done. So are all those listed as done have been completed,
Yes.
even though there's not a percentage complete in the far right column?
Right, because instead I just initialed and dated on the farthest right that it was completed, so I didn't put a percentage in.
And is there like an acknowledgement back from the audit firm that it's?
No, that won't happen until they perform the next audit.
Okay.
And so if it's something that was the first full year is June 30, 2018, I would expect that finding to not be there for the June 30, 18 audit letter. But if it's for June 30, 19 is when it'll be fully, a full year in place, then it will still be there for the June 30, 18 report, and it won't drop off till the 19 year.
So right now, the only item that we're showing, it looks like we're looking at research on the third item down,
Yes,
and the next three are done, another research with in process and then to be done noted down below.
yes,
Right.
And that's reflective of the percentages on those items that are still not done or complete. On the
Yes.
Third column from the end. Okay.
those are my best guesses at those, because I hadn't really measured them in that kind of term, but that's what I kind of.
This is the actual list, but what we're really looking at tonight is not production on this list or where we're at, just the format and the summary with the changes
Right.
that were recommended.
Right, to make sure that it does tell you the elements that you need to know, and then as we move along, we'll be able to get, a few of these we'll have hopefully cleared up in the next 2 months. That's really my hope. The business license software is really kind of the highest on our list right now. We're working on that solution. And then the cost allocation, we're working on that too, so.
Thank you.
Did we decide to review this monthly or quarterly?
I'm going to bring it in monthly until we have all of them resolved.
Right. Okay, anybody have any other questions? I think this addresses the concerns and the questions that we had last time, reviewed it, and it certainly makes sense to me. Seems to be pretty clear where we're at.
Do we have any public comments?
Do you have any public comments on this particular item?
We do not.
Let's move on to item 3, which is the preliminary June 18 financial report. And we do want to stress this is preliminary. This is not a final report. The purpose of a preliminary report is for initial review and to set out for any questions or clarification that's needed.
Right. So what I have is what we've been bringing to the committee on a monthly basis, but this is for the preliminary June 30 figures for those reports. And then the one report that I tried, but it didn't quite get finished until late Friday, so it was available to you tonight, so you would have it, so it didn't get posted with the rest of the agenda. These documents, we were hoping as a department for the first time to have everything like solidly closed by the end of September. We're very close. We don't have everything quite reconciled, and we have a few open items that are giving us some fits, but we're pretty close with these numbers, so I did want to bring them to the committee so we could talk about them and see if you had any questions on them. They're in the same format that they've been before. It is the general fund and the wastewater fund. Those are the two with the most activity. So those are the ones that we report. The budget against the actual activity for each one, and then we have this year versus last year of each of them. I thought that our results came through quite good. I thought we were pretty close to the budget in the categories, so it came as I expected it to. It wasn't too bad at all. And then when I did the cash balances one, the fifth report, I was really happy that our cash balances are positive in each of our groupings, which means the general fund is still got a positive cash balance at the end of the fiscal year, which is what we've always been aiming for, so we could have the proper reserves for the general fund. So I didn't know if there was anything specific that the committee would want to look at or go through in any additional detail, or if there was any other specific questions. Thought I would leave that open to the committee members.
Are there any particular questions from any committee member?
So these are just preliminary for us to review for the
For the year
fiscal
end.
year?
Mhm.
We'll do a more thorough at a future meeting, review.
I should have finals for you at the next meeting. As far as, it'll be unaudited, but it should be where we believe it should sit for the audit. Of course, they have a knack, auditors have a knack of finding things to adjust, but it's very close to where it is we want it to be.
So you should have those items resolved and,
Yes,
okay.
yes.
Any public comments?
No requests to speak.
We need a motion to receive and file. So moved.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. It's been moved and seconded that we receive the preliminary report with the understanding this is a preliminary report. And at the next meeting, we'll anticipate a report that's ready to go to the auditors.
Would the committee want to have something, just these particular reports for year end, or would it be better to have more information, more detailed information for the year end to review at the next meeting?
Didn't we set up a standard for quarterly versus monthly review?
I believe you're right. I'll go back to those notes. Perfect.
Good
Okay.
memory. I forgot about that.
Good call.
Yeah.
Okay. So then we'll move to the next item, which is the fiscal year 2019 initial city budget workshop update. And again, we stress this is initial, this is not final, this is an in process. And I assume you have a report for us.
I do. The city council had an initial workshop last Wednesday evening, to discuss the opening of the 1920 financial budget. So we could start looking at the things that council want us to focus on so that we build the fiscal 1920 budget in a manner that best serves those needs of the city in accordance with direction from city council. So what I have here is kind of a summary of the discussions that took place last Wednesday night. A lot of it was just what are the kinds of things that council sees that we should be focused on, which is the parks, making sure of how the community looks, how the community is involved in the process, how everything is viewed and seen and utilized, finding the best purpose for the funds that we have available. And then we had a presentation from our chief of police talking about the specific needs and the ways that the public safety departments work within the city and the best way to move forward to keep those services at their highest level. And then we got some direction from council on the things to focus on. We're looking at some personnel increases in the public safety department specifically, and then looking at ways to meet some of the other goals of the council through that fiscal 19-20 budgeting process. So we have the ideas now. We're going to start putting some of the numbers together. The department heads are working on some of their projections forward, and it's not something you're going to have in the next month or two, but we are looking to have that first draft of the 19-20 budget probably January or February. So we have something to start looking at before we need to adopt it in June. So that's really what Wednesday night was all about, was just talking about what it is we want, where we need to go.
Any comments from the committee? Okay.
This didn't come up in the budget workshop. It came up outside of the budget workshop that the planning director and some of the other staff are closely monitoring grant money that they may be able to apply for some of these programs. So the budget approach was without the grant money, because that's not a sure thing and you have to go through the application process. But there's a much more assertive than what we've been able to do in the past, in the immediate past, to go after grant money where it's appropriate. And then, of course, that will help us to squeeze more money out of the budget for more things, if in fact we're able to do that.
Right. Generally, those grant funds are not consistently available, and they're generally very specific in what they can be used for. So we have a method now where we can monitor some of the grants that are offered, and we can take advantage of that process when there's one that seems like it's going to be the perfect fit for the city, something that we can use it for. And we also have to look at the monitoring process and the reporting process on the back end of that to make sure that we can fully comply with any of the other elements of the grants. So we are trying to take a very proactive stance with those.
Right. We want to make sure that we are receiving funds that can be used, but not receiving funds that create an additional burden to where
Right.
there's a delicate balancing act there.
Right.
Okay. Are there any public comments? Okay. I'd like to just tag this to look at when we come down to our future agenda items. Okay, then let's move on to the to number
6.
You want a motion on the receive and file? It's not.
I'll second that.
Yeah, okay, so a motion has been made to receive and file, and all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. So the next item is the number 5, the fiscal year 2017-18 audit and agreed upon procedures engagement.
Yes, at our last meeting, one of the things we talked about is the calendar for all of the audits that the city will be going through in the next several months. So I put this together so you can see we have the citywide audit that will be done by the Poon Group, and they are planning to be here in November to do the actual on-site field work. That's currently the way they have it on their calendar. But we are already starting to provide them with documents through an electronic portal so that they can do some of the front-end work that they can do. They also will be doing a single audit, which is an engagement that only looks at the expenditures that are eligible for federal money reimbursements. So we have the Potrero interchange, which a good chunk of that is from flow-through monies through Caltrans, but it actually is federal money. So that qualifies for the single audit, and so we'll have a secondary report that will be just for the single audit for the city's use. And so it's the the money for Potrero, but it also includes the CDBG money that we get for our sidewalks, maintenance and repairs and things, because that's also federal money. So they look at that as a pooled group when they do the single audit. Then we have the transit audit that's being done by the auditors selected by RCTC, and that is MGO. They performed the audit last year as well. And when they do the audit for the transit funding, they'll also be doing agreed upon procedures for the Measure A monies that we receive. That also then falls under their jurisdiction for doing that review process. We also will be having, even though it's not on this list, the triennial performance audit by RCTC. I don't have the dates yet, but it's also going to be in the next several months. So we're going to have a lot of different groups of people coming through and reviewing financial documents, and hopefully we have everything pretty well squared away with their field work by the end of November, so that we can start reviewing through drafts of theirs in December and have something that we can bring to the committee and to council for acceptance, and they can get that issued in January.
Any comments or questions?
How often do we do RFPs on auditors? Do we do 3-year contracts?
We do a 3-year contract with 2 one-year extensions at the discretion of council, but we do go through a full RFP process. And this will be year number 2 for the Poon Group.
And you mentioned one group that was RTC.
Right, Riverside.
Do we just accept their auditor? I mean, how does it work?
Yes, we do not have any say-so over their auditors. No. So they pay for that engagement, so we don't pay for that either. But MGO will come in and do the audits on their behalf for the funds that they've provided to us for our transportation.
Basically, isn't that we're just providing some services, and so their auditors are looking at what we did in order to complete their overall audit.
To make sure that we've used the monies in the way that we've reported back to them.
And the single audit, you want to just explain what that is? It's
a horrible
kind of
process. It's very large. It's a lot of work for the auditor, having performed many of them. But it means that if you have monies that originated with the federal government that have flowed down to you, you don't report it based on when you receive it. That doesn't have anything to do with it. It has to do with when did you expend it. Mm-hmm. So whatever you've expended, if you didn't get the money first, if it's a reimbursement program, it's when did you spend the money. So we spent a bulk of the money in the last 12 months on the Potrero interchange. We haven't gotten all that money in yet because it is part of this grand reimbursement program, and we have several out there pending that we haven't received, but they're going to test those expenditures during the time frame that they're looking at. They're looking at not only the invoices and that they were approved, but they have a very specific set of compliance and internal control issues that are tied to federal funds. There are things you must do in compliance with the federal agency's internal processes. They've changed the rules recently, so I'm not quite as familiar with them now, but it used to be you had to do eligibility, you had to go through and test for payroll to make sure that you did the certified payroll, no matter what you're contracted, they have to provide those documents. And all of these things have to come together in order to make sure we've complied with all of the elements of a single audit. So when that is complete, we'll have like a financial statement. It's called a CFA, but it'll just be a summary of expenditures by the specific grant funds. And then we'll have a report on internal controls for those funds, and we'll have a report on compliance for those funds.
And this is done, in essence, for the federal government.
Yes.
And it's in addition to, but not really part of our citywide audit,
right. But
they intermesh quite a bit. I just wanted to make sure that was clear. So in essence, we're really being looked at here. Two different entities for 2 different reasons, but looking at the same general overall concept of what's being done.
Right. So it's not a balance sheet, an income statement, and all that. It's not. It's just a schedule of expenditures of federal awards. So it's like a one-page financial.
And a whole lot of making sure that it was applied correctly. Mm-hmm. You're right.
There's the book's like this thick.
Right.
It's
Okay.
lots of things.
Any other comments on this from the committee?
Yeah, I had a quick question.
Oh, yes, and we've gone well over it. It's 750,000.
Okay, that was one of my questions. We
Yes.
reached that threshold on the Petro.
Right.
It looked to me, I thought we
Oh,
definitely
yes,
did.
we're well over that. And they keep changing that threshold, the federal government has, and they're talking about upping it again, so we'll see, but we still would have been over.
Because it was 500,000 and it went to 750.
So in regards to the single audit for Petro, and you also mentioned other improvements that were done with grant money, such as curbs and sidewalks and other.
Right, our
improvements.
CDBG.
Are those a separate single audit that will be reflective separately from that project?
No, what they do is, you look at all of the sources of federal money, you add it together. If it exceeds that threshold, then you do a single audit. The auditors have to come in and determine major programs versus non-major. They don't call them minor, they're major or non-major. So in our case, it's going to be the Potrero grant is major. CDBG is only, I think it was only 120,000, so it would be a non-major. So they'll do most of their testing on the Potrero. They might do a little bit on the CDBG, but probably not. And they will take all of that in order to put their report together.
Do they review all expenditures based upon an accrued improvements on site, or they just select a percentage that they look at?
They have, there's specific selection criteria that you have to follow for a single audit. It's never 100%, but they look at the larger ones. They're going to look at contracts. They're going to make sure invoices go with contracts and that we followed all the contracting rules that there are for the federal government. There's just a whole slew of
So
compliance.
That single audit will be generated per federal compliance requirements, and will probably pass through this committee and the council, but then the actual final acceptance would be submitted to federal?
Yeah, they will be submitting it through the federal clearinghouse, absolutely.
Yes.
Yep.
Will the citywide audit also capture
Yes.
that same amount
It'll be
for our
in
own
there.
purposes?
Right, but in a
Separate.
different way.
Right.
But yes, it's still part of the
Will
citywide
that
audit.
be isolated between the two different GCs, the two different contractors for the different scopes?
No.
That's all I have.
Any public comments? Right, then we have a motion to accept and file, and a second.
I will make a motion to receive and file.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Move to the next item, which is number 6, which is the wastewater treatment plant and brine line projects update. And again, this is an update. This is not a completion. It's something that is in progress.
So at the last meeting, the committee had wanted to get an update on where we are on the project for the wastewater treatment plant, the expansion, and the brine lines themselves. I put a little bit of the background in the staff report as far as the why and the when and all of those kinds of things. But I also wanted the committee to know that we track the expenditures through the project accounting portion of our software. So the codes for the wastewater treatment plant expansion and the brine line, those are the two project codes that we assigned to them. That's not any magic. We just did them numerically in sequence. And I have attached the reports that come right out of the system that's the project activity reports. This is just the actual funds that have been received and are available and are being spent, and then the actual expenditures that have been paid. So from a finance standpoint, this is just the monies that we actually have on hand and have spent. The actual project accounting through the engineering department is going to include contracts that are signed, whether they've been paid or not, trying to keep track of everything in total. So my accounting for finance purposes is more of a cash flow based project accounting. Do we have the cash in order to pay is everything where it's supposed to be? And engineering is looking at it on a much broader scope. But since the finance committee had asked me for the status, I took the impression that we were looking at the cash flow basis of the project accounting. So I have provided everything we have so far as the monies we have already made available to this project and what we have spent. And it's 10 pages of activity, because we have a lot going on. But the very last page is where we have our largest amount of funds available. And that is the bond sale is complete. And we have done the closing. It's all been done, and the funds are now available. They're being held by the trustee, so that when we do have the construction progress going, when it's time to make the construction payments, we do have the funds available now. So the contracts for construction are being awarded tomorrow night at the council meeting. So that is something that we can also take into consideration as we move forward. We will have all of these contracts in place so they can have the groundbreaking. So we're right there ready to start this project and get it going so it can be completed by March of 2020. And I can continue to provide the cash flow finance reports of the project as we go forward.
Any questions from the committee?
I'll defer my questions till after public comments.
Okay. And just like a tiny clarification, when you
Sure.
said that the funds are being held by the trustee, you want to explain that process just in a broad overview?
Oh, sure. The bonds have been sold. The proceeds are held by the trustee. In order to access those funds, we have to do a full requisition with all the documentation to support it for the reason that the funds should be released. We've set up a process whereby the requisition will be prepared with a statement from management as well as the invoice from vendor or invoices from the vendor with a summary. So they'll wire the funds to the city. The city will then be sending the payments directly to the vendor so that we can always see them match up within a few days of each other. We receive the funds, they go out. We receive the funds, they go out. And we'll have all the requisitions in a binder by project so that we always have them accessed and they'll be tracked that way. And then we'll also be keeping track of the contracts themselves to make sure that the payments on the contracts have been duly accounted for. And because of the size, we'll also be holding back retentions that we'll also have to track as well.
Thank you. Any public comments? Okay, Mayor, you said you had some comment?
This summary page where you have the sources and uses of funds.
Yes.
That does not go to council tomorrow night, correct?
I don't believe so.
I don't think that was in the packet, right?
No, this is like the overall big picture of the sources of the funds that we have, or at the time would have. This is just the budget, and then the costs themselves with the contingencies you can see that are built in. So with any good fortune, your contingency is still left over at the end.
Yeah. And I appreciate the explanation of how you have to request the funds with the complete packet of documentation. That's good to know. Thank you for explaining that.
Okay, we have a motion.
A comment.
Sure.
I mean, I really appreciate that the report in here. This is the one I've been looking at. I mean, on a cost basis, or so I could pinpoint right away what a contract or another department that really maybe overboard or not, and I really appreciate this. Thank you so much on this. I mean,
Sure.
So I could everybody. I mean, get familiar with this and see any variances of on a month-to-month or on a quarter. That would be great to see on,
Sure.
on the comparison.
I can do that. And one of the things too is even though engineering is keeping track of committed contracts, and I'm not necessarily, it depends on, my timing is going to be different from theirs. But at the end of each month, we are comparing our records to each other to make sure that what I have, they have, what they have, I have, and we don't have any missteps as we go along. The last thing you want to do is find that there were costs I accounted for that they didn't. So we are doing that monthly as well.
That's good. That's my next comment on that, on the engineering job number in there. I hope there's a job in every category of the on the constructions, and that would be nice to get the percentage of completion on every task they have in there, and that would be nice to see it,
Right.
especially on my side. I mean,
Yes.
I do understand those numbers. on
City
there.
Council is going to be getting updates also. Those updates that they'll be getting with the numbers in them, those are going to be engineering's numbers.
Good.
So they're going to have all the contracts that have been signed, whether, it's been actually incurred yet or not, it's a commitment. So they have a much more right now today, what would we be held financially accountable for. So those are the reports council will be getting are theirs. And then what I have is basically cash in, cash out, and make sure that we all stay within the budget.
Do you do the, all the contingency in there, do you allocate that or do it on the end?
I have it in there as part of my budget line items. When I set up the project accounting, I have a separated code for contingency. But I also have hard caps on each one of the different areas so that expenditures, when they get to a certain point, get frozen. We're just really getting off the ground, so we're not anywhere near that. But when I set up any of the project accountings, I'm putting hard caps on them so that we can make sure that everything stays within budget. We're monitoring them internally as we go, and the engineering analyst has access to all of the reports real time that I have access to, so she can always compare what's been entered on my side against her records to make sure that we're all on the same page.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Okay, if we have no other comments, and
I
we
had a couple questions.
Go ahead.
Okay. So on this project, it's already been placed out to bid, bids have been collected, because if we're talking an award tomorrow, there's been multiple
Oh,
bidders at.
yes, a large amount of work. They had to go through, and I'm going to use the wrong terms, I know I will, but they did a pre-bid something, pre-qualifying?
You pre-qualified the
Okay.
bidders?
Yes, so they did all of that process and then they determined who was qualified, and then they did the sealed bid process, breaking it into three components: the wastewater treatment plant and expansion, and one reach of the brine line and the second reach of the brine line. So they had three, and then they had the public opening of the bids, and then tomorrow night, they didn't do anything until we had all the bonds sold, so then tomorrow night they'll be able to award the contracts because the funding source is now
Do you
available.
mind me asking, when was the opening of the sealed opening of the bids? What date did that take place approximately? Was it in the last 30 days?
No, I believe it was in June,
Okay.
June or July maybe.
And then the bids, the budget lines that are reflective here are based upon budget allocations for the actual scope of work based on the bids, the contingency of surplus amounts?
Yes.
The 10% I see seems to be the typical for on some of the work that's being set aside.
Right.
Are all three projects going to run simultaneously?
Yes. Otherwise, they'll never make the March 2020 deadline.
Why?
Were all three bid awarded
what?
to the same? There were
No.
multiple bidders on all three. Each one had a separate
Oh,
bid
yes.
process.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Some of the
And the council packet for tomorrow night has all the documentation in it. So if you go to the web portal
Or the
and
agenda
you
for
click on
tomorrow.
it, you can get two versions, the summary with just the agenda, but then the full
Or the dig-
packet.
or the dig deep.
So go look at the full
Okay.
packet, and it'll give you a lot more detail.
Yeah, there's a
The way
ton
she
of
described
detail.
The bid process is accurate. That's-
Great.
Yeah, they started the process early this year, I want to say, is when they started working on the pre-qualification stuff.
Had
I
to.
believe it may even have been the end of last year is when they began all of that.
So-
It's been a
The
big
timeline was
progress.
so aggressive that they
Yes,
had
very
to.
aggressive.
So in this case, we're funding a project based upon the proceeds from bond sales and other sources that
Yes.
were referenced here.
Yes,
So it's being funded, the money comes in from the bond trustee, goes in direct payment based upon a payment application from the general contractor.
correct. Once it's
For our
been,
Potrero project, do we pay up front and then get reimbursed through the grant process?
Yes.
After the fact?
Yes.
So we have to float that
Right.
capability out.
and
of
we're finding that Caltrans takes a little while.
All reimbursables.
But we do have, we've fully received one of the invoices, no problem. We have one that we should be receiving anytime. We have a third one that they've now approved, so we expect to get that funding in the next 2 to 4 weeks. And we're putting together yet the next packet for approval. So we're trying to stay on top of them to try and maintain the shortest cash flow advance that we have to.
I'm curious, did one company bid on
I don't think so.
Different companies bid
I
on
believe
different-
so, because I believe that the waste treatment
talking about-
expansion, it was somebody different than the brine lines, but I think some bid for both of the brine line reaches.
I'm just
But I
thinking,
can't remember. Yeah, but three different awards.
Could be economy of scale here, a big company comes to bring all their equipment and everything, I mean,
Right.
could have been some
Right.
economy, but then the projects could have been completely different, so that you needed different expertise.
Right, they are
Sometimes-
different.
Sometimes can't cover the.
Right,
And of course, that would be the bidder's choice.
Right.
If they believe that there'd be an economy of scale if they receive both.
Well, the brine line is so, I mean, it all ties together, but doing the brine line, it's regional, from here to, I'm probably doing this wrong, oversimplifying, but from here at the plant to the county line, and then from the county line connecting to San Bernardino.
Right.
So that, building those brine line things is different than the plant. So I'm pretty sure that the people that bid on the plant, I don't believe they bid on the
Well,
brine lines.
I don't know any of the companies, but I know there are companies that do.
The whole kit and
Yeah,
caboodle.
and that would certainly be their choice if they wanted to
Right.
bid. It
Right.
wasn't.
Yeah, I think that was all through that pre-qualification
Yeah.
process. Everybody got everything, so.
Yeah.
I'm somewhat familiar with the process they went through here in the city, because I did quite a bit of research on it, and it was a very thorough process, so.
Okay, do we, any other comments?
one last question.
Sure.
The cash flow projections for both these projects are based upon a project schedule, so for the purposes of Potrero, there's an expected project start and completion date, and they're further reimbursable, and for this, we're looking at when we expect completion and utilization of the trust funds at that time, right?
Right, right. So, and with Potrero, now that we've got this kind of settled, it's taken a lot of my time. I'm at the next meeting hoping to bring you the same set of information, but for Potrero. I think Potrero is about 60% maybe now, somewhere around there. But I'll bring that information next time too, so you can see how the cash flow is working for that and the costs that we've incurred to date. So, because those are our two big ones, but this has really taken up a tremendous amount of time.
Can I, on the Potrero, since we're discussing that, I mean, we're in 60%, that's a phase one, right?
That's correct, phase one.
Okay, yeah.
So on that, there will be overlapping on phase two? I mean, do you think? I mean,
I know finance, but I don't know engineering.
I
I
know.
think they're working on design of phase two now.
already?
I
Okay.
think so, but
Yeah.
not construction, and I'm not sure how that feeds in total.
Uh-huh.
I'm not certain how that all comes together.
Thank you.
When we, go back to Potrero, when the contractor submits payment applications
Mm-hmm.
for percentages complete, is there an independent third party?
Yes.
Or is it in-house that validates the percentage complete?
You know, we have a, oh, I'm going to do this wrong too, a construction management,
Okay.
a project manager, and then we also have an engineer that we contract separately even from them, and they're all coordinating and making sure that everything is in the condition it's supposed to be, that it meets the standards, that it's really complete, and that everything is the correct reflection, and before I ever even get the invoice for payment. So everybody is signed off on it.
And then on that side, we do a voucher system on that, right? I mean, his question is on the a certain percentage of, I don't know, you go by percentage or we go by month. That any expenses or anything, the project manager or the developer will send all those invoices and about.
Right, we're doing it as presented.
As a percentage? Okay.
Yeah, in this case, with Potrero, we have the company doing the construction, which I believe is Ortiz.
Yeah.
And then we have the construction management company, and they get everything from there, and then they approve it, then they send it to our other engineer, and he goes through it, and he does site visits. He comes out here, I think it's once a week, but it may be once every other week. I think it depends on what all's going on. And then he sits with the engineering staff, and they go through it, and once it's all signed off, then I get it.
It's probably also validated by the design firms, or the original
Yes.
design firms that specified
Yes.
the work.
That's Mark Thomas is the architect, and they are also, yes,
When they
looking at
submit
it.
their payment applications, do they also put in the supporting documentation that you would utilize for the single audit later on?
Yes.
Okay, I think we've established that there's a process in there.
We
There's
have
not
a
single
process.
person.
That's good.
We have a process.
And so at this point in time, I'll entertain a motion to receive and file this report.
So move.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, let's move to the next agenda item, which is future agenda items. And I would like to entertain adding that in our February 2018 meeting, we have that follow-up draft that was mentioned, or follow-up report on the budget. I believe you said you'd be finished with it in January or February.
Well, we may have
With what it
a
is.
first draft of
Yes.
fiscal 1920 in February. If I asked Todd, he would say, you'll have that next week. No, but my goal is to have that first draft of the budget kind of gone through at least once with the department heads. I'm hoping February.
Okay. And so, any comments about requesting a report on that status at that time?
No, I think that's good. We also talked, Milana, you mentioned that you would do the same thing in terms of giving us a summary for Potrero.
Yes,
Okay, and when can we expect that summary for Potrero?
the next meeting.
Okay, does this require any kind of motion? It just
Nope.
goes,
Nope.
just.
And then
Just-
Notes.
typically, if something is pertinent, you'll just add that to the agenda.
Sure.
financially.
Sure. I'll include the internal control checklist. I'll get that so that if there's been changes, I can get that updated. And then I will go back, because yes, in my notes, I have the detail level that we need to bring to the committee. And by then, I should have all my accruals, fingers crossed, all my accruals completed. So we'll have that detail for year end to look at that draft. And that'll be just before the audit, so it'll be good.
Can you include that on the internal control on the last item in there? What's your due date on that? Because it's blank right now.
On the, for
On
the
the
internal,
internal control,
the
on the,
last item?
Yeah.
I have to work with the transit staff, and I didn't want to speak on their behalf, so I
Oh,
left it
okay.
blank. But I will, hopefully between now and the next meeting, I
Yeah.
should be able to
Okay.
work that
So
out.
that will complete the whole.
Right, yeah.
Maybe, also, like, you have on some items, it says research, like on the business license section.
Mhm.
If you can put like the actions taken, because it's blank.
Right, because we hadn't actually taken any actions yet. We're trying to figure out the best software solution. Our IT manager is doing that research to identify cost benefit. Do we go with this software or that software, or do we do the upgrade in the current software, or, what do we need to do in order to meet the needs of the city? So
Why don't you just put that in there?
Yeah.
I could do that.
Yeah, that would be
Just-
helpful.
Ah,
Thank you.
I could do that.
Okay,
And last month, I requested a kind of an overview of the risk management department. It wasn't a,
Yes.
not a critical thing, it's just something I think
yeah,
the committee might be interested in. So I just want to make sure it's not forgotten.
Nope.
Do it at your convenience. If it fits into next month's budget, fine.
Okay.
If not, as long as it's within the next 3 or 4 months, it'll be
Okay.
fine.
yeah.
I can do that.
And that was the instruction we had. It's really
Right.
kind of outside the scope of this committee, and it's just a matter of getting some information
Right.
for
So
for
in,
clarity. and
I don't know if it
understanding.
really is out of the scope of this committee.
but if we're looking at, are you looking more at the flow of actions, if this, then that, if this, then that, or,
I kind of, every city kind of operates a little bit differently, and I just want to know how this city operates in terms of
when a claim is filed,
the
or?
claims are filed, the limits, and it seems like, looking at past budgets, there's been increases. So usually in risk management, you try to reduce those. If you were contracting with the state for insurance, risk management insurance, which you don't, you self-insure.
Right,
But if you were, everything is on, they call it experience value or.
Right.
You know, accidents
Right.
previous and, 3 years history and your rates and all that kind of stuff comes into view. I just wanted to kind of know how we approach it and
How
if we're
we're
doing
looking at
what
that.
we should be doing to
Yeah.
limit our risk,
Right.
And all we're looking at there
Sure we are.
is an understanding,
Right,
Well,
right.
okay?
And
But
then,
in terms of this committee, we're concerned with the financial
Finances
aspect,
and the-
not
Which
the
is-
policy.
right, but
No,
it
no,
is,
I'm not
it
asking
is,
about policy.
the financial impact to the accrued liabilities, and I can, because risk management is more than one particular thing, so,
It's a big umbrella.
and I have to be careful that we don't say or put something out there that is supposed to still be confidential. So I have to be really careful, but I can put together like a flow chart of how things go and who they go to. And I can probably find some or provide a list of the reporting that we have. Everything's done through a third-party administrator. So I can get that information together, but of course, we can't discuss any
Don't need
cases or
real-
anything
no, I
like
don't
that.
want anything
Okay.
detailed. I just think a lot of us, a lot of you, I mean, never worked in city government before. And in order to kind of understand how these various departments are funded, the priorities have within the city for funding, staffing levels, all that, you kind of need to know some of how these functions within the city work. Some cities have, separate departments. We combine some departments here because we just don't, we're not a big city. Some cities, they have a lot of money, they have 5 times more departments, different kinds of budgets and everything
Sure.
like that. So I think it's kind of important to understand that as we go along. So I would encourage anybody, if you don't understand how a department particularly works, to ask about the workings
Well,
of
of course,
the department.
of course. And for an understanding, that's where we're at. So let's move on to our, yes.
Can we maybe have something added to the agenda? I know we were talking about doing the grant research and get updates on where we are with that as far as research, what we're applying for, that type of thing. If we have someone that.
Well, we don't have a grant department, and we don't have a dedicated grant person.
We don't.
And that's really management of the city decision in terms of how to do that, which is not really in our wheelhouse. The grant, as it affects the budget and the overall finances of the city, that actually would be more in our wheelhouse.
Right.
And we do have that kind of broken down by department. In other words, the planning, the director of planning looks for the grants that relate to the planning department.
Right.
And then the chief looks for the grants that relate to the public safety element. And so the way that we do it, and correct me if I misspeak, Chief, but the way that we do it is to break it down by department, because we don't have the budget for a big additional staff where we'd have a grant person. There has been in the past, but that was one of the things we eliminated when we cut the budget and the personnel back in terms of meeting our immediate monetary needs, and we cut back that position.
But I can tell you that that we're working to have the finance department become the central point of grant tracking. We aren't quite there yet. Everyone's been very used to doing their own. But once we get that function a little more centralized, then we should be able to give you a list of all of the grants that are open and what we've received or not received, why they're pending, which department they go to. So once I can get that function centralized, that would be a great report.
That's what I was more
Yeah,
interested in, that kind of
I
stuff.
think we're trying to get back to that point. We sort of broke it apart completely when we couldn't have the personnel that was able to invest their time in it. But we're trying to build it back up kind of from the grassroots now of the departments and build it up to the finance level. And I didn't mention transit. Transit looks at their own grants too.
Theirs are
Applied to
very, very
transit.
specific. So
Right.
there's our aren't going to be anything that can be piggybacked with any other department. Their grant sources are really, really specific.
And then the other thing that we've put back in place is that we now have lobbyists that are looking at grant opportunities on a state and a federal level that apply to the city. And that was something else that had to go by the wayside while we were really pulling in the purse strings. But we've put that back in place where they now have a list of what the city priorities are, and they're looking to help us with matchmaking for what those grants are that fit the city priorities.
It would just be nice if, to know, because I know with some of the federal grants now, instead of them, when you apply, they're turning them into continuation grants. So where you might have had a grant that was 2-3 years, now that grant becomes a 6-year grant, and there's no, separation between the two or stoppage where the grant ends. If you get in the right cycle, you could have a grant possibly built for 6 years.
I think if you as a citizen have some specific knowledge that you think the city could take advantage of, certainly contact the city manager or mayor, and I'm sure they'd be glad to.
Right, because we do have some regular
take
recurring
advantage.
grants that we take advantage of every year, but now we are actively looking at available funding sources and what they're to be used for. A lot of them are either too specific and don't quite fit the needs, or what I'm also finding is that they're requiring a significant match, which we're trying to avoid if possible, because we're looking to fully fund projects with grants. So we just have to be really careful that we don't end up in a quandary on how we're going to be able to comply with the grant.
And some of them give you a way out if
Some do.
you can't afford the match.
Okay.
You can write a statement too.
Okay.
Oh,
Let's
well,
pull
that's
it.
good to know.
I had
That
an
is your
agenda question.
area of knowledge, isn't
Yeah.
it, Joanne? Yeah, appreciate that.
Yes.
Yes.
For future agenda items, I was wondering about the possibility of adding an item with regards to the recently accepted fixed capital inventory listing and valuation report. And I think I might have reached out to you. I don't know if you got my email.
I did. I haven't had a chance to.
No problem.
Yeah.
No problem. So I just wanted to, because of recent public comments, and I was gone last month, I had to thank you for the excused absence. I was out of town. And looking at the report, I just wanted to validate that the documentation that I found on the transparency portal, in the Laserfish, under finance, under the capital, that's it, right?
That is it.
That's it for the year-end
Right.
fiscal
17.
2017. That's going to be a revised yearly as we go forward, right?
Yes.
And at depreciation factored in, increased assets factored in. So is it possible, even though it's already been accepted, but for a baseline for understanding future as it comes through, would it be possible to have a question period where I could ask staff? Would it be at a meeting, or would it be something I conduct on my own?
If you have specific questions, you're absolutely welcome to ask staff on your own.
I can submit my own
You-
questions,
yeah,
get
sure.
response. I just don't want to run afoul of the Brown.
No,
Okay.
Nobody's discouraging that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
No, no.
going forward, realize that
Allowing enough time for response.
Oh, of course.
realize that across the entire country, very few cities had that in place when I think it was the Yellow Book. What's the
GASB 34.
When GASB 34 went in place, very few cities, counties, government entities had those, and they had to create them. We were a little slower than others. What kind of records we had compared to everybody else, I couldn't begin to speak to, but we weren't the only ones in the boat we were in. That has been done now,
So we
and
have
so what we will see is changes
Right.
because of activity. So new assets will come in, they'll be added. Assets that are retired, sold, whatever, for whatever reason, are removed. So we're not going to have to reinvent that wheel again. It's just going to go from what we have and go forward.
Right.
So
And
I'd like to be able to submit questions.
Oh, sure.
If time allows for get responses, and then
Yeah.
maybe consider that for a future agenda item if I think there's something worthwhile bringing to the whole committee
Sure.
at that point, rather than put it on the agenda right
Yeah.
now. I just wanted to go ahead and research. Just
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
questions on the valuations, how some of the numbers came up, if there's more spreadsheets or more documentation, but I'll leave that separately.
okay.
Okay,
Okay.
all right. Treasurer's report.
Well, I'll just be going over our agenda and what we discussed in the meeting, and just an overview of what was discussed.
Okay. With that, at this point in time, we should adjourn the meeting at 7:03, and note that our next meeting that's scheduled is for Monday, November 5th at 6 p.m. Thank everybody for your time and your attendance, and